Hollyleaf's story is the very first novella we have come to in this series. More importantly, though, it is a Hollyleaf book, and one that I have an awful lot of feelings about. The story of Hollyleaf and Fallen Leaves' relationship in particular is one that a lot more fans know of than truly understand. There is a lot I have to cover today, though, even beyond him. Hollyleaf's story came out on March 13th of 2012, about 4 months after The Forgotten Warrior and Beyond the Code, and less than a month before The Last Hope. In the past, a lot of supplemental material, that is, super editions or mangas outside of the main series, were released on the same day as main series entries, or as each other, to increase popularity. However, this pattern was not followed with the first novella. It's anyone's guess why this could be, but I imagine part of it may have had to do with the fact that novellas, at their introduction, were ebook exclusives, lining up with the Kindle devices that had only recently begun to outsell physical books for some sellers. This being new territory, it makes sense to design novellas with only around 100 pages, rather than the usual 350, to ensure that, if it turned out badly, they wouldn't have to make any more. With that being said, choosing this specific story to open up the novellas with was a smart choice, as Hollyleaf was already an exceptionally popular character with a specific story to tell, now that we know she was alive but absent for the first 5 books of Omen of the Stars. Even in the modern day, I've seen more fans who are familiar with Hollyleaf's story than any other novella, though whether that is because of Hollyleaf's own popularity or the book's is up for debate. This book was also written solely by Victoria Holmes, who usually worked as an editor and outliner, one could say creator, of the series, allowing the book to have a more intimate understanding of the whole series. Since the book starts right after sunrise ended, the allegiances are identical, with the exception of Whitewing being in the nursery with Dovekit and Ivykit, as she was at the end of Power of Three. Hollyleaf is even still listed among ThunderClan's warriors, rather than outside the clans, and the long list of Cats and Jingo's group from Sunrise are included in Hollyleaf's story, even though none of them will actually appear in this book. Because of how short the novellas are, the statistics will always be based on a pretty small sample size of lines. Hollyleaf's story in particular is very lopsided, since Hollyleaf doesn't interact much with anyone besides her co-star, Fallen Leaves, for the duration of the book. There is, technically, a speaking cast of 21 cats, but the top 5 members of that cast take up 90% of the lines, and no one besides Hollyleaf and Fallen Leaves even manages to get 15 lines. As a result, the gender divide isn't nearly as meaningful as it usually would be. 57% of the speaking cast are she-cats, and those she-cats get 63% of the lines. But in the latter case, what that mostly means is that Hollyleaf gets slightly more lines than Fallen Leaves. With that said, though, I think it's time for us to get into this story. We open with Hollyleaf buried under rubble, running through painful memories of the fire scene, her murder of Ashfur, her speech at the gathering, and her confrontation with Leafpool as she fights to stay alive and conscious. She regrets everything, and hopes that her family forgets about her. She also has a broken leg, making movement difficult, and she can't quite remember how to get out of the tunnels. Finally, she spots a faint bit of light, a slightly more gray than black side tunnel that she scurries towards, but as she tries to stand, her leg buckles completely and she passes out from the pain. She wakes up somewhat delirious, but alive, being tended to by a Tom she has never met before. He asks her to rest, and when she wakes up again, he notably doesn't explain who he is, but does ask her how her injury is doing, and offers her a minnow to eat. While he won't say his own name, he does recognize her as Hollypaw from when he saw her and her littermates in the tunnels during the flood in Dark River. Finally, he says his name is Fallen Leaves. He once lived on the territory by the lake, like the clans did, but now the tunnels are his home. He won't say any more about his past and instead turns back to caring for her, including bringing her a mouse that happened to come into the tunnels. Both times he has brought her food, he has asked her to eat it, but refused to share with her or eat anything else himself. He continues to also refuse to answer any other questions about himself or stay with her, but does check that she can take a few steps on her paw before resting again. Roughly a moon goes by before Hollyleaf is fully healed, and at that point she asks to finally be shown around the tunnels. This shocks Fallen Leaves, who assumed that she would want to leave immediately, like everyone else does. She, however, has nowhere to go, and says that Fallen Leaves has been a good friend, in that he cared for her physically at least, so she has no reason to go. Following a lengthy tour and only one instance of Hollyleaf getting lost in the pitch-black darkness, they return to Hollyleaf's nest, and she asks Fallen Leaves to stay with her for once. He lays by her as she goes off to sleep, and Hollyleaf notices that his fur is completely cold. Skipping forward a few moons, Fallen Leaves is now much more extroverted and eager, waking Hollyleaf up when it is time for a patrol of the tunnels. Hollyleaf, meanwhile, is pondering over whether or not this life is really what she wants. She did choose to stay with him, so she must have wanted to, and Fallen Leaves has been doing his best to make their daily life closer to that of a clan cat based on her stories. Moreover, with the memories of her clanmates and deeds playing in her head, she is unsure that she could possibly deserve to want anything more than she has now. She is alive, healthy, with shelter and company. That should be enough. Fallen Leaves engages her in small talk about how the river is doing and what the tunnels are like, but also has begun to drop a couple more hints about his past. Now, and during the time skip, he mentions Sharp Claws and how he got lost in the tunnels while trying to become one. However, he still refuses to answer any more questions about his past, or explain why he won't go back to them as Hollyleaf encourages. He just says it is too late and storms off. Hollyleaf would pry more, but she also hasn't told him about Ashfur, or Leafpool, or The Gathering, so she figures that they may be on more equal paws than she assumed. At the edge of the tunnels, a creature runs in and quickly corners Hollyleaf, a terrifying, unstoppable fox cub. The fox seems scared as well, whining and pressing against the wall next to her, and as a two-legged dog's voices can be heard outside, we as readers can guess why. Fallen Leaves finds her and brings her back to their nest, where Hollyleaf gets annoyed by the fox's yips preventing her from sleeping all night. Fallen Leaves, meanwhile, doesn't seem to care, and is sure the fox will find its own way out eventually. Hollyleaf resolves to go after it and help it out, if only to get herself some rest, but also because it is a baby, hardly more dangerous to her than a kitten. She quickly finds the cub, approaches it, and calms it down with a soothing voice and grooming. The fox falls asleep against her, and Hollyleaf is later awoken by it playfully nipping her front leg. She leads the cub out of the tunnels step by step, and both of them are remarkably affectionate, with the cub acting like a bouncy young kit and Hollyleaf as a doting mother, despite her instinctual fear. The fox even asks, with body language, for her to come along when they leave the tunnels, but she explains she can't come, and the fox reunites with their mother. Hollyleaf sees this and likens the cub's demeanor to her own, back when she was a happy young kit with her siblings and mother, or adoptive mother. Time passes, and Hollyleaf begins watching the tunnel entrances. Fallen Leaves has picked up that she's hoping to see the fox cub come back, but she does know they belong outside with their family. Fallen Leaves asks if Hollyleaf belongs out there with her family too, but she says she has no family, challenging Fallen Leaves to finally discuss his own. Fallen Leaves responds that he has to stay here because it's where his mother, Broken Shadow, would come to find him, and repeats this sentiment without any elaboration when Hollyleaf offers to help him. Hollyleaf gets fed up with Fallen Leaves' refusal to really speak to her and decides to leave the tunnels. She tells him that he saved her life, and she will always be grateful, but she is taking his offer to be outside where she belongs. Fallen Leaves cuts her off to flippantly order her to go. Hollyleaf is hurt by how little he apparently cares, and leaves. She tries to make her way on her own, outside clan territory, and also wrestle with her identity as a clan cat without a clan who broke the code but still believes in it. The snow begins, making hunting more difficult, and she also comes across the lost fox cub, now much more grown up. They attack her immediately, forcing her to flee in shame. She feels not just hungry, but lonely, more than ever, and returns to the tunnels. It turns out that Fallen Leaves added fresh feathers to her nest, hopeful that she might come back, and quickly gets her some minnows to bring her health back up. He sympathizes with her plight with the fox, but also chides her about it, as they both acknowledge how foolish it was to believe a fox would remember and love her. He gets her back to their daily patrols to give her something to do, and he finally lets her in on some of the feelings he has for his old group. That he thinks about them all the time, but it has been so long that he can't remember much, and that there's no way to change anything now. Though he, again, doesn't explain why. Hollyleaf, in turn, tells him about her past and what happened with her mothers. Fallen Leaves concludes that both Squirrelflight and Leafpool clearly loved her, and probably still do, regardless of what she did. From this point onwards, Hollyleaf adds ventures outside to her daily tasks, though Fallen Leaves never comes with her. She finds herself looking out for both the fox cub and any signs of ThunderClan. Fallen Leaves asks if she misses them, and Hollyleaf clarifies that she just wants to make sure they're okay. Fallen Leaves suggests visiting them in secret to ease her worries, and she does. She watches ThunderClan camp from the top of the hollow, learning about the changes her clanmates have gone through in the last many moons, including the fallen tree and Briarlight's injury. She feels guilty for not being there to help her clanmates somehow, a worry Fallen Leaves tries to ease. Hollyleaf tells him about Ashfur, and Fallen Leaves asks if that's why she was sent away. But since she wasn't sent away at all, he points out that she could and should go back. She has the option to, and it seems like every cat who even knows about Ashfur loves her too much to not take her back. Hollyleaf doesn't go back right away, but does begin visiting and watching her clanmates more frequently, even leaving them herbs in secret when she has the opportunity. Fallen Leaves grows more distant, not responding with any emotion to her increasing number of stories about them and the ways she has been able to help them. Hollyleaf decides to catch him some prey to make it up to him, but he is nowhere to be found when she tries to give him a squirrel. He later wakes her up, not to deal with the prey, but to say two clanmates, Ivypool and Blossomfall, are stuck in the tunnels, and Fallen Leaves failed to fully lead them out. Hollyleaf finishes the job, getting them out but sticking to the shadows to avoid being identified. Even so, she truly appreciates being able to help her clanmates. Hollyleaf avoids returning to ThunderClan for many moons, making sure to spend as much time with Fallen Leaves as she can, and not catching him any more prey, since he'd never touched his squirrel. At the end of Leafbear, though, she spots a marigold and knows she has to get it to ThunderClan. On the way, she spots Cherrypaw and Molepaw being attacked by a fox, and saves them from it, even knowing that she was definitely spotted. She starts dreaming of being in ThunderClan and being able to help them daily, and eventually she confronts Fallen Leaves and tells him that he has been a true friend, but she doesn't belong here. Fallen Leaves accepts, having anticipated this. He always hoped she would stay, but she has a family to return to, and her clan needs her more than he does. Hollyleaf spends the next moon watching ThunderClan and waiting for an opportunity to join them, along with battling her own anxieties about what will happen when she does. Fallen Leaves hasn't been around much at all, so Hollyleaf has been left largely to her own thoughts and sights of ThunderClan. But one day, he appears and says more cats are in the tunnels. This time Ivypool and Dovewing from ThunderClan, and Soul with a whole WingClan patrol. She realizes it is time to go, as she can't get her clanmates out fast enough without revealing herself, and says goodbye to Fallen Leaves. He promises he will never forget her, and she approaches Ivypool and Dovewing, announcing herself as Hollyleaf and promising to lead them out. Boy, for such a short story where so little actually happens, there sure are a lot of things to discuss. The idea of this book has spawned so much fan discussion and theories and headcanons that I think a fair number of people have forgotten what the book actually contains. In many ways, for a person like me who has a multi-decade fixation on every aspect of Hollyleaf's character journey, this book simultaneously feels like it introduced several extremely rich details and ideas, and like nothing of consequence was addressed here. I'll try to break down what I mean, starting with the problem that rears its head in the very first pages of the story. Hollyleaf concluded Power of Three in an extremely heightened emotional state. She learned that Squirrel Flight wasn't her birth mom during a fire that threatened her and her brother's lives, killed the Tom who threatened them to stop him from letting their secret out at a gathering, and proceeded to spend a month hiding her murder in secret and getting more and more emotionally closed off and volatile to the point of taking out her anger on prey and clanmates. At the end of this month, she learned that her parents were Leafpool and Crowfeather, breaking both the warrior and medicine cat codes, and could not stand the fact that her birth broke everything she swore to protect. Not seeing her own path as justified anymore, she went before the gathering and spilled the secret herself, but was met with shock and dismay at this choice too. Finally, she confronted Leafpool, trying to murder her to some extent, but when that failed too, she ran away from the clans entirely and into the tunnels she knew were collapsing. This is the mindset she is in when this book starts, but the Hollyleaf that opens this book doesn't seem to be nearly as volatile or unstable. Other than her physical symptoms, her main driving emotion is immediate and irreparable guilt. She instantly sees her actions as wrong, thinks StarClan would only look on her with shame, and hopes that her family leaves her for dead so they can live happy lives without her. Her journey through the story is not coming to terms with her actions, or learning how to change her thinking to better deal with reality, or reconsidering the code and clan culture that motivated her to act in the ways that she did. Instead, it is about a cat who is already morally great and guilty about a cat she was, yesterday, trying to leave behind her old life completely, out of said guilt, until she can motivate herself to go back to the clanmates who probably already want her back. This instantly squashes a lot of the potential benefits in a book like this, making it a much more static journey that is also disconnected from the character we knew in Power of Three. Rather than helping us to bridge the volatile and desperate cat from Sunrise to the timid but moral cat we see in the Forgotten Warrior, we seem to start out with the cat we see in the Forgotten Warrior and just watch her choose over the course of a year whether or not to return to her clan. It lessens the weight of her choice to stay away or leave in the first place and prevents us from connecting with her character as a whole. This choice also made it hard to actually have things happen in the short time they had, as more of the book was spent recapping Hollyleaf's previous story bit by bit, or having her waffle over the one key choice of the book, rather than showing us something new. It's part of why Hollyleaf's adventure with the fox cub only takes about 2 very short chapters. However, even in that time, something so bold and unique did catch the attention of fans from within this otherwise bland book, myself included. It is very clearly making an allegory that it almost follows through on. Hollyleaf makes it no secret that she sees a younger version of herself in this cheerful fox cub who so easily bonds with her and relishes in the love of their mother. Then, when it turns on her, the effective adoptive mother by way of metaphor, Hollyleaf is absolutely shocked and devastated. Had there been more time to dedicate to her mulling over these feelings, this could have been the moment where Hollyleaf realized how her actions were perceived and felt from her mother's perspectives, and began to forgive them in a way that even her brothers back in ThunderClan struggled to. She was already poised to be thinking about these things after Hollyleaf's inability to turn Leafpool into the villain during their final conversation, but this could truly give Hollyleaf the empathy she needs to get past her own jumbled feelings about the relationship, lies, and emotions at play. More than that, it was clear that Hollyleaf really appreciated being able to care for someone and have them need her, even someone as traditionally scary as a fox, and she ends up applying that same mentality to her clanmates, in secret, once her relationship with the fox falls through. If she wasn't a completely changed cat on the first page, these impulses could be what helps her to realize that she never wanted to live independently. She's an extremely extroverted cat who loves to care and be cared for in return, which is why it's worth it to return to her clan and make amends for the wrongs she did to them. This is also distinctly not a need she could fulfill either on her own outside of the territories or in the tunnels with Fallen Leaves, because maybe we need to get into his stuff. Fallen Leaves is mostly famous in our modern fandom for being Hollyleaf's either friend or brief boyfriend or mate, depending on who you ask. However, that is distinctly not all he is. Prior to the publishing of this book, we were already very familiar with Fallen Leaves' past and story as one of the ancients who got lost and died in the tunnels on his way to become a Sharpclaw after he was sent in by Rock. We know that Broken Shadow, his mother, grieved for him, and that his death was one of the final straws that pushed them to move to the mountains. We know that Fallen Leaves has lived as a ghost, confined to the tunnels, ever since, and we know that despite that, he has been able to show himself to, at least, Jayfeather to help during the flood, and talk to him casually ever since. We know he is lonely and yearns for companionship, and we know that he wants to see his family again, but can't, since their afterlives are separated. What I'm getting at is that we already know a lot about Fallen Leaves from the main series alone, which is why I take issue with the approach this book uses for his character. Most of the time spent with Fallen Leaves, and because of the length of this book, that is most of its runtime, is spent on a mystery of why Fallen Leaves doesn't eat, why his fur is cold, why he can't leave the tunnels, who the Sharpclaws were, where his family went, and why he can't join them. The problem is that we already know the answers to all of these questions if we've been reading the main series. That he is dead, and if we haven't read those same books, then this book already drops every answer for what happened to the much more important Hollyleaf and her murder of Ashfur. So we can't make the excuse that they were avoiding spoilers. Hollyleaf goes until the end of the book being unaware that Fallen Leaves is dead and what his history is, which both leaves the mystery frustrating and unsatisfying, and makes it really difficult for Fallen Leaves and Hollyleaf's dynamic to feel balanced. The timeline is a little hard to track in this book, but it seems like Hollyleaf spent roughly a year and a half in the tunnels with her companion. In this time, Fallen Leaves spent a lot of time caring for her physically, but much less talking to her honestly. Even at the height of their friendship, when he woke her each morning to patrol and name the tunnels, and stayed beside her each night, he still didn't divulge much, if any, of his past or feelings to Hollyleaf, and got mad when she brought it up or tried to help with things that were clearly upsetting him. Meanwhile, Hollyleaf eventually tells him everything about her family, clan, and murder. He shows active disinterest in any part of her life that she doesn't share with him, including not only her clanmates, but even the fox cub, who wouldn't bother him since he doesn't need to sleep or worry about danger anyway. And he also gets angry and avoids her the instant it seems like she might want more than a life with him. Even as she starts venturing out of the tunnels, as he suggested she do, she makes it clear that she still wants to stay with him and doesn't think she can go home. Instead of empathizing with her or accepting this, Fallen Leaves continuously assumes and acts on the idea that she will have to leave permanently, and gets mad at her for not going back since he actually can't go home, while she can. Which sounds an awful lot like guilting her into it, particularly as you read it. Moreover, it doesn't seem like even agreeing to go back is what he wants her to do, because as soon as she does say she wants to try going home, he starts avoiding her permanently and leaves her to fend for herself, until the moments her clanmates are in the tunnels. Obviously, I have a bias, because I cannot look at Hollyleaf's character arc, actions, and words across the series and think that she is straight. I don't think she's into romance at all, particularly not Tom's, but as this novella contains the entirety of Hollyleaf and Fallen Leaves' time together, and with the way this relationship was portrayed, I don't think they even came across as good friends. Fallen Leaves is clearly too wrapped up in his own projected emotions and unwillingness to let anyone in to actually bond with or share himself with Hollyleaf, and that is something that becomes frustrating to Hollyleaf herself over numerous points in the book. He does have reasonable in-character reasons to act as he does, but it doesn't stop him from being manipulative, guarded, and dismissive of Hollyleaf's feelings, which doesn't make me want them to stay together at this point in their stories. This is especially bad because Fallen Leaves and Hollyleaf could have been great for each other if they were written differently. As I mentioned before, the mystery of Fallen Leaves' past and current status didn't actually need to be a mystery, and if he had been open about it as soon as he realized Hollyleaf was staying, they could have realized how similar they were to each other. Each of them were pining for, but had also given up on being in their original homes due to failures that they were ashamed of. Each of them acted recklessly, entering the tunnels even when each was explicitly warned of the danger. If you elaborated more on who Fallen Leaves actually was, it could very well turn out that both of them had ambition to carve out their identities and make their families proud, but that they now each feel they failed those families in a way they can't take back. Fallen Leaves could have used the difference between them, that he is dead and Hollyleaf is not, as an encouragement rather than a guilt trip. And maybe we could have even come back to the hanging thread of Fallen Leaves in The Last Hope to have Hollyleaf help him reunite with his family too, considering that we already know the Dark Forest cats are planning to physically come down from a different afterlife. Even in that best case, I still probably wouldn't be in favor of a romance, as they would actually be a little too similar to each other to push each other to grow in the ways I'd like them to. But for the duration of their isolation, they could comfort and understand each other in a way no other cat could, and each of their wishes and successes could inspire the other to improve their lives. Hollyleaf's story gives me so many mixed feelings. I think the ideas they brought up, the premise they gave, and the time period they set this book in have so much potential, and are so interesting and unique that I end up thinking positively about it every time I spend enough time away from it. However, actually reading it feels like spending a lot of time in a very bad relationship as we relearn the basics about two characters we already know, without seeing the progression that both of them, realistically, should have gone through in this period. As a result, it falls exactly in the middle of my current book rankings. I have too many fond thoughts about its ideas to hate it, but too much disappointment in its execution to love it. Novellas are very short, and this was their first time dealing with that page count, but I think even this time could be spent better than what we saw here. At least, next time, we will finally be able to put this whole era of the series to rest with the finale of Omen of the Stars, when we return for the next episode of our trip through time.